My wife's family never raised their voices at me. They didn't have to. Their disapproval came in softer ways. Polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, conversations that paused when I entered the room, and jokes that were just light enough to laugh at, but sharp enough to sting. They had money, old money, the kind that made them believe good manners were a substitute for kindness. And I had a job they never bothered to remember. "Remind me again what it is you do," my father-in-law Harold asked one Sunday afternoon, swirling ice in his glass like he hadn't asked the same question at least a dozen times before. "I work in asset management," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Oh yes," he smiled thinly. "That vague thing." My wife, Claire, shot me an apologetic look from across the table. She always did. And I always pretended it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered when her mother, Evelyn, would ask Claire, never me, whether we were comfortable financially. It mattered when her brother joked about how some people married into the family instead of earning their way up. And it mattered most when we were in that house. A sprawling two-story place in a gated neighborhood with tall hedges, polished stone floors, and a view of the river that looked like it belonged in a brochure. It was the family home, the one Claire had grown up in, the one her parents never stopped reminding everyone they owned outright. They talked about it the way people talk about legacies. "This place will always be ours," Evelyn said once, her hand resting possessively on the marble countertop. "It's been in the family for years." He nodded. Mile said nothing, 'cause that was my role. We visited often. Too often. Every dinner felt like a quiet examination. My clothes, my posture, the way I held my glass. I learned early that the less I spoke, the less ammunition I gave them. Still they found ways. "You know," Harold said one evening, leaning back in his chair, "when we bought this house, you had to prove yourself. Banks didn't just hand out loans like candy." He looked directly at me. "Not like today." Claire's fingers brushed mine under the table. A silent apology. I squeezed back. It wasn't her fault. She had grown up in this world. I had married into it. The truth was, I didn't need their approval. But I did need peace. And that peace shattered the night Harold announced something that made my stomach tighten. "We've been thinking," he said casually, cutting into his steak. "This house is getting expensive to maintain. Taxes, upkeep. It's a lot." Evelyn nodded. "At our age, we need to be practical." My heart beat a little faster. Claire frowned. "What are you saying?" Harold dabbed his mouth with a napkin. "We may sell. Or restructure ownership." I felt Claire tense beside me. "Sell?" she asked. "But you've always said." "I know what I've said," Evelyn interrupted. "But circumstances change. And we have to consider what's best for the family." Her eyes flicked toward me for half a second. "In a way," Harold continued, "we were thinking of putting it in a trust. Maybe with certain conditions." Claire's voice dropped. "Conditions?" "Well," Evelyn said smoothly, "we need to make sure this house stays with people who can truly support it." I knew what she meant. They weren't talking about money. They were talking about me. I kept my face neutral, even as something cold settled in my chest. Harold leaned forward slightly. "This affects everyone. Especially you too." Claire looked at me, her eyes searching my face for worry. I gave her a small smile. "Whatever you decide," I said calmly, "I'm sure you'll do what you think is right." That seemed to surprise them. They expected resistance. They expected insecurity. What they didn't expect was silence. But inside something else was happening. Because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this house, this symbol of their power, their status, their leverage, was never truly theirs in the way they believed. And the moment they tried to use it against me was the moment everything would change. The pressure didn't come all at once. Never does. It arrived in carefully chosen words, polite invitations, and conversations that always seemed to happen when I wasn't supposed to be listening. After that dinner, Claire grew quieter around her parents. She didn't talk about them much, but I could tell when she'd been on the phone with her mother, the way she rubbed her temple, the way her smile became practiced instead of natural. One evening, as we were washing dishes together, she finally spoke. "They're serious," she said softly. "About the house." He nodded. "I figured. They want to put it in a trust," she continued. "But they're talking about restrictions." I glanced at her. "Restrictions for who?" She didn't answer right away. "They don't trust you," she said finally. "Not because of anything you've done. Just because." I turned off the faucet and dried my hands. "That's their choice," I said calmly. She frowned. "How can you be so okay with this?" "'Cause I know something you don't," I thought. But I didn't say it. Instead I shrugged. "It's not our house." The lie tasted strange in my mouth. Not because it wasn't true yet, but because it had once been true. A week later, we were invited back for another dinner. This time it wasn't casual. It was formal. Candles, wine that cost more than my first car, and a man in a suit I didn't recognize seated at the table. "Daniel," Harold said, gesturing. "This is Mr. Whitaker, our attorney." Claire stiffened. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "Nice to meet you," I said evenly. Whitaker smiled professionally. "Likewise." The conversation stayed light at first. Weather, markets, neighborhood gossip. Then, like a switch being flipped, Evelyn leaned forward. "We've made a decision," she said. "About the house." Claire set down her glass. "Already?" "Yes," Harold replied. "We're moving it into a family trust. For protection." "Protection from what?" Claire asked. "From uncertainty," Evelyn said smoothly. Whitaker cleared his throat. "The trust ensures the property remains under responsible stewardship." His eyes flicked to me, just briefly, then back to his papers. "And what does that mean for us?" Claire asked. Harold smiled. "It means that if anything were to happen, we want to be certain the house stays with blood." The word landed heavily on the table. Blood. Claire's face flushed. "So what are you saying?" Evelyn folded her hands. "We're saying that if you and Daniel were ever to divorce." "That's not happening," Claire snapped. "Of course not," Evelyn said quickly. "But life is unpredictable. We're simply planning." I watched the entire exchange quietly. Then Whitaker slid a folder across the table. "These are the terms," he said. "Standard, really." I glanced at it, but didn't open it. "What kind of terms?" I asked. Whitaker hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. "Daniel would waive any claim to the property," he said. "In any circumstance." Claire stared at me, stunned. "That's insane," she said. "Why would you even ask that?" "Because," Harold said firmly, "this house was built by our sacrifices, not his." The room went quiet. I felt Claire's hand grip my arm under the table. "Say something," she whispered. I looked at Harold, at Evelyn, at the lawyer who thought he already knew the ending of this story. Then I smiled. "If that makes you feel secure," I said calmly, "I don't have a problem with it." Claire turned to me sharply. "What?" I said. "It's fine," I repeated. "It's your family home." Harold looked pleased. Evelyn relaxed. Whitaker nodded, already reaching for his pen. Claire pulled me aside after dinner, her voice shaking. "Why would you agree to that?" she demanded. "They just erased you." "I wasn't erased," I said gently. "I just didn't argue." "That's not the same thing." I looked at her carefully. "Do you trust me?" "Yes." She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, of course." "Then let it go," I said. "For now." She didn't look convinced. Neither would I have been. The documents were signed a week later. I watched Harold's hand move confidently across the page, the same hand that believed it had just secured his legacy. What he didn't know was that the moment his pen lifted, the house stopped being leverage. Because the truth was, the trust didn't change ownership. It only revealed how little they understood about it. Soon, they were going to find out. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Not from Claire's parents. Not from the lawyer. From the bank. I answered it while standing in the kitchen, coffee cooling in my hand. Mr. Carter, the woman said politely, we're following up on a routine audit related to the Rutherford property. I raised an eyebrow. Yes. There appears to be some confusion regarding the ownership structure. I smiled faintly. Yes, I said. I imagine there is. That afternoon, Harold called Claire. She put the phone on speaker. Daniel, Harold said stiffly, skipping the pleasantries. We need to talk. Of course, I replied. What's wrong? Our attorney says there's a discrepancy, he said. The trust paperwork didn't process the way it should have. That's strange, I said mildly. Everything was signed. Yes, but, he paused. According to the county records, the property was never solely yours to place into trust. Claire looked at me, confused. Harold's voice sharpened. Daniel, why is your name already attached to the deed? I set my coffee down. Because, I said calmly, I purchased the house. Silence. Then Evelyn's voice, faint in the background. That's not possible. It is, I said. I bought it 6 years ago. Harold laughed once, short, disbelieving. You were barely making anything back then. He nodded. That's what I let you believe. The truth was simple. Years before Claire and I met, I had built something quietly, a company that never needed my name on the door. When it sold, I didn't upgrade my wardrobe or change my car. I invested instead. One of those investments was a struggling property company. The same one that financed Rutherford Estates. The same one that technically owned the land before Harold ever signed his first check. When he bought the house, he bought it from me. Through 3 layers of shell companies and a holding trust that never mentioned my name. Harold spoke again, slower now. So, the house is mine, I finished. Legally. Always has been. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. That's why the trust didn't work, I continued. You can't restrict access to a property you don't own. The line went dead. 2 days later we were invited back. Urgently. This time there was no wine. No candles. No confidence. Harold sat rigid at the table. Evelyn looked like she hadn't slept. Whitaker didn't meet my eyes. We want to resolve this amicably, Harold said. I agree, I replied. Evelyn leaned forward. What do you want? I looked at Claire, then back at them. Respect, I said. For both of us. Harold scoffed weakly. You already have the house. I don't want the house, I said. You can live there as long as you like. They blinked. But, I added, Claire and I will be listed as equal decision makers. No conditions. No exclusions. No bloodline language. Whitaker nodded slowly. That's reasonable. Evelyn swallowed. And if we refuse? Shrugged. Then I sell. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Harold nodded. The documents were revised. This time no one smiled. On the drive home, Claire stared out the window. Why didn't you tell me? She asked quietly. Because I didn't want power to change how you saw me, I said. And because I wanted to know if your family respected me without it. She reached for my hand. I'm sorry, she said. You didn't do anything wrong, I replied. But they did. A month later, Evelyn called to invite us to dinner. Her tone was different, careful, polite. When we arrived, Harold stood to greet me. He offered his hand. I shook it, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because he finally understood who he was dealing with. Some people mistake silence for weakness. They confuse humility with helplessness. And they don't realize the ground they're standing on until they learn who built it.